Number 2019-40 S. Mr. Dunbar.
Forrest Dunbar.
Pete Peterson.
Fred Dyson. Dick John Wilson.
Yes, well.
Austin Davidson.
Gretchen Wenhoff.
Eric Croft. And we had Miss LaFrance. Miss LaFrance is here as well. That is the person's members present. We have before us a small technical amendment to the Transportation Code. The origin of it is some of the leftover discussions that Mr. Dunbar had started about when we were considering the TNC or Transportation Networking Companies. Our ordinance to do that, of course, the history is then a repeal effort that failed, and then the legislature preempting our statute and us then repealing ours because the legislature had stepped in on TNCs. Mr. Dunbar had proposed, and we had passed various things that lightened some of the load, or attempted to, on the taxis in recognition of their complaint that, well, we have a very lightly regulated TNCs now, you should reduce some of ours. He handed that off to me, and I thanked him for that. And we have I was originally looking at some of the smaller requests. Let us have whatever colors we want. Let us do some other things. But the more I stared at it, and the more I met with them, it seemed to me clear that the taxi operators wanted most to go back to a time before Lyft and Uber, and wanted me to magically take them there. And I said I could not do that. But if that were going to be the case, if their second best was either, and I'm sure that'll be much of the discussion, stop regulating us or regulate us no more than you do the Lyfts and Ubers. Because let the market decide in effect. And we have had, regulations on what the drivers of a limousine can wear, and can't wear sweats. And don't like it when they wear flip-flops. We've regulated most, that's somewhat trivial, but all the way to regulating their rates. And so when Mr. Falsey and I met with some of the taxi cab people just to try and figure out what more could be done, I at least, I won't speak for him, came to the conclusion that we at least ought to consider not regulating taxis at all. That essentially when the state preempted half of our transportation network, probably is less than half now, but on its way up. If they want to regulate it, they can. But they and just set up discussion, then we'll open it up for member questions and comments. I think the other most rational alternative to this, let's say three alternatives. We could keep regulating taxis and have virtually or very lightly regulated, say, TNCs. We could regulate taxis at about the level of TNCs with the state stepping in and mandating the one, and then we just match what the state does, sort of the middle ground. Or this that's proposed that we not regulate taxis and limousines at all. The reason I'm proposing this is it seems to me inappropriate for us to try and regulate a transportation network with one hand tied behind our back by the state. That is, if we take the entire responsibility, we could do it, and I think we were doing it responsibly. But the state has preempted us and said certain rules apply to one half of it. Again, may not be half in terms of total numbers, but I think it's heading that way. And I'm not interested in being in the regulatory business where we're that hamstrung, and want to tell the state, okay, you rail about federal overreach and preempting of you, but here you've stepped into something we were handling and regulating responsibly, had a public vote on, had allowed against a lot of pressure, and you have preempted us, then you regulate the taxi area if you want. And it also seems to me that a lot of these things can be set by the market. What rates apply and when the market can decide in competition with Lyft and Uber. If you don't like different taxi entities, organizations, informal dispatch or formal, can decide they want to be the safest, and they argue we've got trucks and we can get you out of the snow, or we're all, the yellow ones are all ones that have handicapped, or we triple check our drivers, and so if safety's a big deal for you, you want to pay more. So that's why I put this forward. And so now I will turn it over to the Assembly, and in order, Mr. Dyson, and who else, and Mr. Weddleton, and training, okay?
So, I think you and Mr. Dunbar outed yourself as classic liberals, an organization started by Jefferson. But you said to me in private conversation that there was a phase-in. Would you briefly explain to me how that works into this?
Well, if I did, I apologize. This just ends it. The effective date. I thought we did it on a clean time.
There was a 5-year phase-in.
A 5-year phase-in by limiting new entry.
Well, that was in the ordinance that Mr. Evans sponsored and passed had a 5-year phase-in, and we're in year 3 of that now, I think.
But this would just end it. End regulation, end restriction, end selling of it. Part of the fiscal note was we'll lose a lot in terms of our licensing and then save a little bit more in terms of the people that wouldn't have to be there. Mr. Weddleton, Dunbar, and training.
And please just summarize for me how Evans's beginning of this 5-year phase-in was supposed to work.
We would offer so many new permits each year over a 5-year period, and then at the end of that, it'd be open entry. Anyone could come in. And the taxi cabs are feeling the pain of more and more licenses. But that was a way to phase it in from just a limited entry system to everybody in the pool. It was a stepped up.
Thank you.
Mr. Weddleton.
I got 2 questions and a comment. One question is, does the current system pay for itself? Do the fees and so on for taxis pay for the cost of the regulator?
Close, but not quite, I think, is the answer. Mr. Falsey?
Yeah, the S version comes with a summary of economic effects that shows that the office loses about $50,000 annually. It used to pay for itself, but as we have put more permits out to auction, the value of the permits, or the sale price rather, I should say, of the permits has fallen, and now they're just falling.
I also repassed on my urging. It was $1,900 a year, and we dropped it to like $1,500. We dropped the price, and we made it non-self-sufficient, but that was in response to them, the industry saying that we're being killed by Uber and Lyft.
Okay, so the second thought, there is a kind of statement, I don't know if you said it, but people talking about this, well, we should level the playing field. Taxis, just like Uber. But it is an absolutely 100% level playing field right now. If they choose to do Uber and Lyft instead, they a driver, they can do it. Okay, or they can do this a little bit different. And we, there was a committee council meeting last night and asked, what do you guys think about deregulating taxis? Uniformly, they said, no, we want these. Because I know that they're drug tested, they got insurance, et cetera, and so on. So these are people, they want taxis, they want that. And so you have that choice. You have 2, it's a very different product, really, than Uber, that people make that choice. So prefer taxi.
I won't respond to each, but I'd say they could market differentiate themselves that way too. We are the people that have triple drug testing and the safest drivers, and we also have traction on our tires or whatever. They can market any way they want. Mr. Dunbar.
Yeah, I think Mr. Wellington's point is a good one, although I think Eric's sort of counterpoint is also true. That I do believe that in some ways the kind of regulatory framework that we have set up, and which doesn't pay for itself as Mr. Falsey, in some ways kind of subsidizes this industry. And they see it as a burden, but in other ways it's like, well, actually what we've done is guaranteed certain quality within the public. Though I think among young people, that perception has broken down to a large degree. That is, at least Quinn Davidson could maybe speak to this, but the young people that I work with or talk to they're not afraid of Uber and Lyft, and there's not a huge different perception of quality. But anyway, the questions I have are for the administration, and I guess that's just you, Mr. Falsey. Your attorneys are here too. So the first question is, do we currently have a transportation inspector? Because I heard that Mr. Musser had stepped down or retired, and I don't know if he's been replaced.
No, through the chair, we currently do not. Eric Musser retired January. So we are working on a plan to either appoint a new transportation inspector, or when somebody acts on this resolution, we would need one.
So that brings me to my second point. What is the administration's position on this ordinance?
We are still assessing it like you are. I think through the chair, every time we have this turnover into the top level personnel, it's an occasion for us to step back and be thoughtful about how the offices are designed. So a lot of the municipal offices have just evolved. They've never really had a hard design. So we were taking a hard look at what the office now does in 2019 and what market it is playing in. As part of that, we did have a conversation with the taxi drivers themselves, and I was somewhat surprised to hear them say, tear the mandate completely off. Just like you don't regulate grocery stores or used car salesmen or anything else that mostly in the market, just don't be involved at all. We are still internally coming to grips with what we think about that. I think it is the case that there are parts of the Title 11 that probably have outlived their usefulness. The Taxi Commission used to be a pretty robust organization. On paper, it's regulating price, quality, and safety and then hearing complaints. But in practice, it is almost impossible to get people to volunteer for. It barely ever makes a quorum, and its last vestigial real role is to make recommendations about price, which they haven't made in a very long time. And it just shut off the open entry system after 2022 if they have evidence that it should be shut off, and it's not really even clear what that kind of evidence consists of. So I think at the very least, we would look at a lot of these provisions and say we probably don't need those anymore. But as a general matter, whether there should be a total repeal, we have not really come to a conclusion.
So my last follow-up question, Mr. Chair, and it's for you and for you, Mr. Croft, to introduce this. And maybe it's too early in the process, although for you, Mr. Croft, you're about to leave. But like, what do other cities do? Because is there a transportation inspector in Fairbanks and in Juneau? I don't believe there's one in smaller towns. I mean, I went to Seward, and there's all these kind of like little companies that are like little independent companies that are kind of vertically integrated. So what do other cities in Alaska or comparable cities of our size in other parts of the country do?
So we'll have to do that survey. That's not something that I yet know today. I know from general historical practice that in large metropolitan areas over the East Coast, Chicago, New York, was fully regulated, fully robustly regulated, much like we had. I don't know what their current intentions are. We have heard anecdotally, at least from the drivers, that there are places on the West Coast where it is catch as catch can. That there's basically no regulation at all, or not much more than a register. I exist. I think there's not much regulation. The framework that we have now, I think at the very top level to help orient everybody, since the resolution, the ordinance that you have in front of you says just repeal everything. I think pulling out the high level threads, the commission exists to do those four things that I mentioned, to make a recommendation about pricing, about quality, about safety, and to turn off the permits. The taxi inspection office regulates the fees the drivers charge. They inspect the meters, so sort of like a weights and standards kind of thing. Is your meter really true? They do some vehicle safety standards, so mechanically, are your tires good? Are some of your systems functional? Do you have a required GPS unit? Do you have a required camera? They do some after-accident drug and alcohol testing for the chauffeurs, and they do regulate chauffeur conduct. We sort of are a customer service complaint agency for this industry, somewhat uniquely. A yellow cab dispatch driver was mean to me, and then Eric Musser figures that out. And then also, are you wearing flip-flops and sweatpants for reasons I can't really fathom. We also make the drivers work through a dispatch company, so we force a structure into that organization, and we require a certain amount of records. And I think with that top level, you can kind of go through and ask the questions, which we did to the drivers with Assemblymember Chair Croft. You really don't want us to set fees anymore. And they said, no, we'll let the market decide. You really don't want us to certify the meters. No, we'll have true meters, and if we don't have true meters, the market will figure that out. We'll have terribly old reviews, no one will use us. You really don't want us to mandate cameras and GPS anymore. We all have GPS, we're all going to have GPS, and I want cameras in my car. It's dangerous out there. Okay, so maybe the market takes care of that. Drug and alcohol testing, and say, yeah, I can't get insurance if I have a guy who's a crazy person. So we sort of take through the list, and I was surprised, but that was their position. They said, at this point, we'd rather, instead of the vestige of Title 11 that we used to enjoy, we'd rather go all the way. Now, I also think, I can't say that as a representative selection of the industry. I have no idea. We were meeting with 6 of them who were self-selected, and maybe that's a minority position, maybe it's a majority position. I don't know. I think we're still grappling with what that looks and feels like. If we say that we are just out of the business, much like grocery stores or used car lots or coffee shops.
So I have a number of people on the list, but I also know that some people from the public came and might inform the rest of the discussion. So are there members of the industry, the public? Yeah, ma'am, step on up and...
Eric, I got a few questions I want to ask you.
Okay, can we hear from them real quickly? And
I'd
then
like
go
to
back?
ask Eric a few questions. Hi, Eric.
Before this person?
Yes, a few questions first.
Mr. Traney, hold on one second. Sit right there, and when Ms. Traney's done, we'll do that.
If Eric Musser left in January, have you guys filled the position yet?
No, I don't say
Then
through
you
the
made
chair.
a conscious decision to abolish the position or what?
No, through the chair. Like I mentioned at the outset of my comments, we made a conscious decision to take a breath and think about what the future of the office should be. In practice, what that meant was that we took Alden Byrne and we said, Alden, how would you like to help out at the Transportation Inspection Office for the next month and a half? And he has been helping Catherine Buckley, who is our code enforcer, keep that office alive. We are in a stasis mode. We are not in a decision that we are definitely not going to do it. And in fact, if the Assembly does not pass an ordinance that repeals this, then I have to do it, and I have some ideas of how that would go down.
Well, we gave you money to hire 2 inspectors. So you said Eric was the only one there? Because a couple of years ago, we gave you money to hire a 2nd inspector. Did you guys do that or just not fill the 2nd spot?
Through the chair, the current budget is 2.5 FTEs. So it was Eric Musser, the transportation inspector, the front desk counter, and a part-time code enforcer. And that was the complexion of the office as it came out of the last few rounds of budget cutting season. So right now, it is our part-time code enforcer and Alden Byrne wearing the cap that says pretend TI.
Years ago, Eric, we worked on this extensively, okay? The reason we have this thing regulated is because we had a lot of drivers coming up here and attacking their passengers. And so we required a complete background check, criminal record history check, which you don't have with Uber or Lyft. They can say whatever they want. They don't do it, okay? They don't have insurance. Our people do. Far too often you see people drive for Uber and Lyft. They don't get insurance until they get in an accident. Then they try to figure out how they can get insurance. The $1 million policy that Uber and Lyft said they have yet to deliver to us or deliver to the state. But beyond that, we did this. The reason we have cameras in there is not to protect the drivers, to protect the passengers. So there's a record of what goes on in that transaction between a driver and the passenger. That's the reason we went to this. What about the cost on people that already have permits? Are you going to simply wipe out the money they've spent to get the permits if you deregulate it? It makes them completely worth nothing. How are you going to deal with that?
Thank you, Mr. Traney. Welcome, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Kim Pavey.
And just speak up so the
Excuse me,
recording
my
can
name
hear.
is Kimberly Pavey. I'm the dispatch manager for Alaska Yellow Dispatch. So, I guess I have a couple of questions first. Excuse me. My first question is, okay, so to be a truck driver, you have to have a special license. To be a bus driver, you have to have a special license. So if you completely deregulate, what is going to be the standard for licensing for taxi drivers? And I understand that Uber and Lyft doesn't have to. However, as Assemblyman Weddleton said, we don't want to be lumped in with those Uber and Lyft drivers that everybody's afraid to get in their car, except for the youngster that's not afraid of anything. Let's be honest. When you're 21 to 25 years old, you're invincible and going to live forever. Okay? So, and of course, if it's on an electronic device, it must be the best thing at that age. Okay? But as we get older, we realize that regulations and rules are put in place for a reason. They're there to protect the consumer as well as the seller. So, because we have bad actors in both sides of that equation. So you have people that are out there to, I don't know, as the papers recently talked about, put a gun to someone's head and shove him in his trunk. And the only reason they couldn't steal his car is because his legs were too long. So, and then you also have the cab driver you know, that, or the Uber driver that attacks their customer with a hammer, or, you know, is accused of sexually assaulting his customer. You know, so I mean, there's bad actors on both sides of the playing field. However, if without any regulation whatsoever, it's going to be like the wild, wild west out there. Because let's be realistic, most cab drivers are not as educated as everybody out there, as a lot of the people that are here. You know, a lot of people that were born here, a lot of people that had the education opportunities that a lot of cab drivers, they don't have that. There's a language barrier. They don't understand. They don't know the roads. And if there's no regulation whatsoever, who's to say that some of these bad actors don't bring, you know, or excuse me, not bad actors, but potential bad actors, if there's nobody looking over their shoulder, is that when they're going to decide to go and do something wrong and say, oh, well, nobody's going to do anything to me for it. Why do I care what the, you know, what this person thinks of me? You know, so, and if it's not regulated at all, while the companies could put in place policies to mimic what those regulations were, don't all of the drivers all of the people that drive a cab, no matter what company they're with, get lumped into that, oh, evil cab driver name and persona and reputation just by the simple fact that they are a cab driver? Just like I don't feel that all Uber drivers are horrible people, but how many of them are, you know, are feared and people won't take an Uber because of the guy that tried to sexually assault a woman with her 3 children in the car in some other city. You know, I mean, those stories, they create a public opinion of the industry as a whole. And it's been said, TNCs are not cabs. It's been said that it's a different model. And that is because the taxis are regulated.
Thank you. So I'm sure there'll be questions. We normally do it 3 minutes. I didn't tell you that before, but no, you did fine. Did you want to wrap up with any
I feel that doing away with the entire, I feel that deregulating is not a wise move.
Okay, and like I said, I'm sure there will be questions. Sir, did you want to say something as well? You don't have to.
Could we ask her questions before we, or is it too?
My name is Rolando Tramba, and I've been in the business for 30 years. And when they start this shopper license, way back, about 40 or 50 years, they require about the shopper license, the rule. And who make that rules is not simply people. And then the transportation commission. About the safety. Now all of a sudden it will change. So I think it's not good to change just for this kind of situation. The towns are growing. So you want to be hearing a lot of gypsy cab, no rules. So the industries need a rules and regulation. That's how I would say.
Thank you, sir. Any other member of the taxi or transportation community that wants to testify? Any other member of the public that would like to say something? Mr. Haber.
When you get around to specific, you get here, but maybe
Yep.
My name is Eugene Haber. I live in National Valley, follow public process. Public process is an appropriate decision made by the governing body is more like public interest. On the subject that was being discussed now, I remind you of the history of this scenario that I attended over the years. The transportation body dealing with the taxi industry, and how it was very well attended that day. And I remember it, Amy Bosky, as a assembly member, attending those meetings on the side. But what has happened with the community is a substantial change in how the assembly decided the issue dealing with the taxi cabs. They went a different direction. They left a situation which I appreciate Assembly Member Trady stating earlier prior to me on this issue is how are we going to deal with that change with what happened with those permits? And, you know, there's a difference, that value. When you made a decision, you created a change in the value of that permit. What these people had paid, that industry had paid. You created 2 different rules. Let's say you, the assembly, adopted law, whatever. But now look at this, hardly anyone's here. But it's not that that industry doesn't care. They do care, because I see a lot of taxi members, they see me, they know what I do. I see what they're working right now. And the shortness of this meeting notice, and yes, you know, this type of meeting, can the industry be here to address it? It originally was scheduled, there was a meeting on this, and I spoke to a taxi that knew that it was scheduled, and they were expecting it, and then it got canceled. So this constant changes creates a situation the industry is not, you know, all of a sudden this appears. With all due respect, you've done a lot of, let's say you, with respect, a lot of you were not even here with these issues that affected that industry. You're new members, with due respect, which caused a lot of damage to that industry. And who's going to pay for it? And how are you going to handle it in the future? I caution you all. Do you realize the mistakes made by the assembly and the city, and it needs to be corrected, fairly corrected. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Aberman. Yeah, sorry, Ms. Quinn Davis. I wanted to get it all in. Anyone who was here, I have a big list. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Much of what I was going to say I think has been addressed already, but my biggest concern is the potential impact to the safety of the public. And so 2 areas, business licenses, Ms. Pavy's point about what standards, I would like to find out what are the options in terms of what can be required under business licensing, if some of the issues of public safety might be addressed there, and also in terms of insurance. I know that we had heard some anecdotal or maybe real, I'm not sure, situations concerning the TNCs and a lack of insurance and the public coming to maybe I don't know if it was the commission or the muni asking for assistance, but I don't know if we could get some information if, you know, that has been a big impact, and repealing this would also, you know, cause the same sorts of issues, but at this point, I guess just more information as far as like nationwide trending and what kinds of issues have other communities encountered when they deregulate. Thanks.
Who would you like that from, Mr. Falls?
I'm not sure who would.
Sound like Mr. Falls should address that issue.
I mean, I will do my own research on some of it, but the business license piece.
I don't feel I'm qualified to. He's much smarter. Sorry to be flippant. So the data on, I'm sorry. There was a part that was what has happened with other cities that have done this. I'll look. I'm not sure they have. I hope not. I'd like to be the first. And there was some data about Anchorage stuff that he might be more able to find.
What we can do with can we require in terms of business licensing, and then also just because I'd heard that too, that the public safety piece could be addressed through business licenses and insurance requirements that are outside, of course, of the muni, and I just was wondering if that truly was the case. And I know Ms. Pavey.
I just wanted to address, so historically, chauffeur's license, when a driver gets their chauffeur's license, that acts as their business license because they are in fact independent contractors. And so historically, the chauffeur's license has acted as their business license. They didn't actually have to come here to City Hall and purchase a business license.
Thanks.
Ms. Wimhoff.
Yes, some of my questions were answered by Mr. Falsey, but I wanted to kind of go back on the concept of marketing. Am I correct then, our regulations are what actually make sure that drug testing and safety cameras and GPS happen, and to deregulate then would make it up to the business, correct? So right now, as far as those safety issues and thinking of the public safety, right now, am I correct? I guess I'm going to ask a question that follows. Am I correct then the TNCs don't have that restriction? I was following this when it happened, but I can't remember how the state impacted it. But I remember following it when it was happening. So do the Uber drivers need drug tests? Yes.
So through the chair, we don't regulate them, and neither does the state, although I will say I'm not expert on that. I think Uber and Lyft will tell you that they do something, but I don't know what that something is, but I think it is a non-governmental something.
Okay. do you know what that non-governmental something might be?
I do. So I actually drove for Uber and Lyft when they first came. I drove for them for 3 months. They did not a very extensive background check. They wanted to make sure that I had primary insurance, which is all that I had, primary personal insurance, which, by the way, this is where their insurance policy falls apart. Their $1 million umbrella that that Assemblyman Traney referred to, where that falls apart is the fine print, because as one of their drivers, I got to read all that fine print. Their insurance comes into effect when the primary insurance has been exhausted. However, if a personal insurance carrier finds out, learns, of course they're going to learn, that driver was operating commercially, that insurance policy is then null and void. So how can something that is null and void ever be exhausted?
That's very tricky.
Yeah.
Can I just answer?
Yeah, and
Your
so,
question.
go ahead.
The provision of state law on drug or alcohol is zero tolerance for drug or alcohol use, Section 2823.090. The Transportation Network Company shall implement a zero tolerance policy prohibiting drug and alcohol use while the driver is providing a prearranged ride or logged into digital network of the Transportation Network Company, but not providing a prearranged ride. The Transportation Network Company shall post on the company's internet website the company's zero tolerance policy prohibiting drug and alcohol use.
Okay, so
There's no drug testing.
Okay,
There's
so
this
if you get
policy.
caught, you're in trouble, but there's no free on that. And then I always go back to, and this is really off the wall, but if you follow my logic with me, having been around a while, there was a point that people were concerned that children were drowning in ponds, and so because they didn't know how to swim, and so the school district put in a graduation requirement that you had to be able to swim a certain distance across the pool, and I was around when they put it in. They increased swimming classes, kids learned how to swim, and then when it came time to start changing things, someone said, well, I don't understand why people need to know how to swim to graduate, get a diploma. And I remember one school board member saying, well, I guess there was a reason they put this rule in the first place. It was looking back, and of course now there is no requirement, drownings still occur, but that's why I'm looking back at this, is every single little regulation that came up, I'm sure came from a story, that now there's GPS safety cameras, even our buses, they're encountering safety issues, the drivers are, if they're alone on the bus and someone's on the bus. So I'm not seeing where eliminating this is helping the public safety if they feel that a regulated company is safer for them. And that's a real interesting thing about the insurance. I mean, if you're in an Uber car and you get hurt, you can't walk anymore, who's going to pay the bill unless your personal insurance covers you secondary? So those are my questions. Thank you for answering them. And thanks
Mr.
for
Peterson.
calling the swimming pool.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And when we started working on this a couple of years ago, there were some questions about whether the municipality might have liability from people who had bought medallions so they could, have a certain number of cabs, may have paid $100,000 or more for that, and we have liability to be sued for that. So if we basically throw out the entire regulation, are we open to be sued?
Anyone can be sued for
I mean,
anything.
Yeah,
So
the
yes.
answer is always anybody can be sued for anything that takes $50 in a piece of paper. I don't see this as materially changing the risk. I think that the gravamen of the complaint would be something like that you took value from me. I think the evolving answer seems to be the courts are not looking favorably on those plans. They're saying the right that you received with your permit or your taxi medallion was the right to operate, not to exclude other kinds of competition. I don't think that since we are currently on a glide path now, we're in 2022 to get a permit just by showing the door and paying the fee. I don't think that a change that fully repeals would materially change our legal risk.
Mr. Weddleton.
So you got a So I would think broader and think that this does create a different kind of transportation system that does have value even right now. With Uber and Lyft. I used to ride my motorcycle with flip-flop shorts and no helmet. It was totally cool. It was
Eric still
incredible.
does that.
But he's much younger than me. So, but you change over time and reevaluate things. But as you evaluate this, I think that is an important point. But so we are kind of creating value with our regulation. We're creating value for business people who run taxi services at different levels. And I don't want to pay for it. I want them to pay for it. So if we're not breaking even, is there some way to cut our costs so we break even or increase their fees? I mean, if they want us to provide a service that helps them differentiate from the competition, I'm okay with that. But I want them to pay 100%.
Yeah, through the chair, certainly we could increase the fees or we could winnow down the cost of the office. The office is currently budgeted down to 2.5 FTE. I think going forward, we probably will take it down a little bit further, something closer to 2 full-time equivalents. Then it may start breaking even again, but there's not much left. I mean, that office is 2 people and probably, I don't know, with the denominator budget, it's got like $10,000 or something. There's not much there.
How much fees, did we make it not break even because of the change that we made 6, 7, 8 months ago?
There are 2 factors. The reduction in the fees probably was the last straw that pushed it over the edge, but because we have been putting more and more permits out to auction, the amount of money we receive in the annual auction has been falling. So, and this gave me the last statistics. In 2016, we auctioned 15 general permits and we got $300,000. In 2017, we put 15 more out and then we got $140,000. It kind of leveled. In 2018, we put 21 out and we got 161. So the revenues that the office have been generating have been falling.
But keep in mind, they also have their it's not just the auction, it's also the annual fees. The annual fees have been going up because there's been more.
You were up next anyway, Ms. Dunbar. Proceed. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, good.
I have one more point.
Well, I do think so. I mean, that puts an interesting point. There might be things that we can, there's a sort of all or nothing approach that would be here. It might be that someone wants to produce an ordinance, and it's not going to be me. One of you guys could produce an ordinance that excises significant parts of the code, but maybe leaves some of it in place. For example, the chauffeur's licenses, because that seems to be something that might create value. But I like what you said, Mr. Welton, about the idea that there might be this other market segment, but there are different ways besides government regulations to capture that market segment. So I always think about in the late 90s, early 2000s, where I grew up in Cordova, the price of salmon was really low. And so all the fishermen got together, and this is a much simplified version of the story, but Cordova District Fishermen's United and other folks got together and said, we are going to commit to quality. And if you hear the word Copper River seafood, it's going to mean something. Everybody's going to get a cold hold. You're going to immediately gut and freeze your fish, and you're going to know the fish from Copper River Delta are going to be high quality. And now the price, of course, is what the price is. It's $50 a pound for king salmon in Seattle. Actually, that's pretty cheap for what you do. But so we are essentially subsidizing this. If they did things like commit to quality or have employees instead of contractors, and some of this is not their fault. We created this system this way, but have employees instead of contractors. Have a union, have a taxi union finally, where people are going through training programs the way the IBW does or the way laborers do. That could be another way to create quality and that assurance without having us say, okay, you must follow this rule, this rule, this rule, this rule, this rule. So that would be mine.
Brief response and then Mr. Trainee.
I just have a question for what you were talking about having a union. So then who would say that they had to be in said union? That a taxi driver would have to be in the union? Would that be something that all of the companies out there would have to agree to?
No, we have construction. We have some construction companies that are union and some that aren't. And the ones that are would make the argument that you'll know it's going to be delivered on time and with appropriate quality because all of our guys are high quality.
So it would be like a seal of approval.
Well,
yeah.
You could do it in a variety of ways, but
thank you, Mr. Trainee.
Is there anybody here that's got a taxi permit?
That owns one?
Yes.
No, I lease one.
But you don't own one?
No.
Okay. You were talking about swimming pools?
Yeah.
During the 91 to 93 time frame, we had a grandfather come in here whose granddaughter got picked up in his house in a taxi cab The test cab driver took her to another street and raped her. He said, can you make sure that doesn't ever happen again? So what we did is we wrote restrictions into this. If you were ever convicted of a court of a sexual oriented crime, you couldn't drive in Anchorage. That's the reason we checked the records, to keep the public safe. I'm not about to try and get rid of that system. Sorry.
No,
There's your pool.
That's what I was looking for, is why things are made in the first place. There's a story behind it. Yeah.
Ms. Quinn Davidson?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Croft. This conversation is fascinating to me. I'm about to turn 40. I don't actually know if I can even claim to be the youngest, but all these things you guys
Yes,
are
you
saying about taxi cabs being safer than Lyft and Uber is the opposite of what everyone my age and lower thinks. I see heads nodding like, you gotta, I'm just giving you some advice, but whatever your market is, your advertising, you're not getting through to us. Like, I take a Lyft because I know that it's digitally recorded that I'm riding with a certain driver, and as a woman on my own, I want that to be recorded. I don't want to go with a cab driver and I have no idea what it's even is. So, just so you know.
But we are
that's
already doing that.
That's great. Okay,
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, we're already doing that.
So maybe the marketing isn't there, and it's just sort of a side note, but I mean, you guys can say, oh, you're young people, you don't know what you're talking about. Young people have a lot of purchasing power, so if you want to be effective, I think it matters to care what young people think.
What are you already doing?
We record all of the cab companies in town now, all three of them. I think City Taxi is app-based.
So I just asked what you're doing.
We digitally, our system records.
Did we require you to do that?
Yes.
We said you must have a digital recording of this?
No, they said that I do believe that it states that we have to have a record of the pickup location and the drop-off location.
So not this digital, you added that on your own?
Well, we are a digital dispatch system, so, we have a computerized dispatch system, so GPS, we have an app, we have,
Okay.
we have an app, and we have digital everything.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Weddleton?
Oh, wait.
Yeah,
Can
go
I
ahead.
finish? So anyway, those are just ideas. Tell people you have an app, do all that, and then we might want to use it. The other thing is, I'm just really curious, of all the cab drivers, what percentage would think that this resolution or this ordinance is a good idea? And it's hard because you all are saying, oh, we met with people, they think it's a good idea. You're saying it's a bad idea. And I don't really, how do we get better information from drivers themselves?
The difficulty with getting information from drivers themselves is the language barrier. They don't feel comfortable coming up and speaking a lot of times. They'll come up and they'll say a few words, but
So
they don't
how
feel.
do we do it? How do we do it? Not why.
It would maybe be something along the lines of what do they call them when
Like a survey?
or survey or an open house type thing. I can't remember what they call it.
Okay.
Town hall, that's the one.
I'd just be curious what the
Yeah,
people
something-
being regulated think. about
Something
that.
along those lines where they could have maybe more than 3 minutes to try to express their point. You know what I mean? Because they're trying to work their way around what their thought process is and put that into English.
Because it just seems to me that right now taxi drivers they're in a vulnerable position because Uber and Lyft are able to do more than they can for cheaper. And so I don't want to be in a position to regulate people who then are at an unfair advantage.
And the
That's my
unfortunate
thought.
reality is that a lot of times Uber and Lyft is not cheaper.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's actually true.
Anything else?
Okay.
Mr. Weddleton?
Sorry.
Just a thought on this, the school district uses cabs to haul kids around, and I wonder if they have
Your price goes up automatically, because of surge price.
Did you talk
They do
to
the
them?
Seattle.
Don't they use them as kids?
Always surge price.
Through
There's no way to
OCS.
take them to their.
Yeah, I forgot to do it. My aunt does send a lot of kids around on tax days where I did not do a lot of heavy lifting for Mr. Crossworth.
That I do know that OCS has, and through the foster programs, that there are cabs because kids are.
Yeah, they were just
yeah.
asking whether they knew the impact, the school district had a question on the impact. Okay, so any other members in the queue? I put myself in the queue only to say, the two things on Mr. Trainey's point on make sure that sexual abuse by a driver never happened again. One is that my impression was the same, that I don't think people feel safer in cabs now. They feel less safe, and for a lot of the technological or other reasons. But also, even if you did, the state took half of it, and we can't do anything about it. So you wanting to say, I've guaranteed that transportation people aren't going to rape anyone again, we can't guarantee anything. Half of it is outside of our control. Wait until your turn.
I'll ask you if your mother told you that somebody dropped off a bridge with you, but I'll get there.
Thank you. We have this. We have a heavily regulated, limited entry system that we've slowly added more and more requirements on. But the base one is you have to charge a certain rate, and all these other things, and then the market comes in. And I've said before to cab drivers, I understand that this is a big disruption in your life. It's horrible to a lot of the cab drivers. But I can't protect you from it. I don't think I would, in the sense that I don't think this has justified why we need this entire regulatory network any more than coffee shops or grocery stores. But I also can't. It's gonna happen. And if you're going to compete, you're going to have to compete yourselves. And me regulating you isn't much of a selling point. The regulations, if you're going to sell it yourself and sell it in the ways you want. And I couldn't, as a regulator, keep up with all the ways that you might try 3 or 4 or 5 different things before you hit on the combination of things that allowed you to compete in that way. But I do know that taking half where we can't touch and having the other where we charge you a bunch of money to do just isn't fair anymore. I know this seems a radical position, but it's actually an evolutionary position that we've come to that is somewhat inevitable. And we just have trouble recognizing it because we're so used to a limited and heavily regulated industry. We haven't eliminated the taxi commission, even though we recognize it really doesn't do anything at all. And what it does, we can't even define very well. That's the time you should be out, when the thing that you created doesn't do anything anymore or gets in the way. If you want to advertise as safety taxi, the safest thing around, we have GPS and we have cameras and we safety test our people, great. And I think there is a market for that. I won't be regulating your rate anymore. You can charge more for that. I mean, when it was limited entry, saying you must charge this makes sense. What sense does it make to say you have to charge this amount? So I would say this is not as radical as it first appears. It just is because we've kept a conception of what we were doing that is no longer accurate. Now you're going to make me back off, Mr. Dyson. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I lived overseas and taking taxis where there was absolutely no regulation whatsoever. And before you got into taxi, you negotiated what you were going to pay for that ride every single time. And I've also been in taxis that were actually, quote, public cars, where there were numerous individuals riding in that vehicle with you. I've actually been in a car where there were 6 of us in the back seat and 5 in the front. There was even one person sitting to the left of the driver. You can survive that, but I hope we don't get there.
Thank you, Ms. Peterson. Ms. Wimhoff.
Just a quick question. Because of my bus issues, I calculated, or I looked up what it would cost to get from my house to the closest bus stop, and Uber was $21, Lyft was $18.50, Checker was $24.50, but they said it could change when I get in the cab. Yellow didn't have an estimator at the time.
In our app?
Yeah. Well, on the website. I looked on the website.
In our app.
Okay. And my question is that $24.50, I'm understanding that's a regulated price that we regulate, that if we weren't regulating that price, they could go lower or higher in that end. So can you go lower without? You can always go lower. You just can't go higher.
Can't go above a certain
Okay,
amount.
so if you were not regulated, you
and the
could,
variance that you're looking at is also true with Uber and Lyft. They just don't tell you.
And well, and I know that I just looked at your app, and it does have something similar where it tells me where I'm going to go from point A to B, and I could pay in advance on this end, which is what I think some people like about Uber and Lyft is it's preset.
Well, yeah, you have to
but
register a credit card.
But I do know, and this doesn't have anything to do with regulations, I would probably have gone with Uber and Lyft out at Chugiak because it's harder to get someone to drive out. And the cabs don't always drive out to Chugiak, but there might be some there, and that's just a case of where the market is different. But I just want to know if that regulation was part of that number. But you could choose to make it a lower rate.
Mm-hmm.
And do your higher rates then come from your higher expenses because of our regulations? Okay.
Any further?
Because the drivers, the cab company per se doesn't make, we make a set amount from each permit owner every month. And so they pay for we call it stand rent. It's a dispatch service fee every month. And they pay $950 for that service. It comes out to, I think, $31 a day. And they go out and they pick up fares. And once after that $31 is met, then they got to pay, of course, for their insurance and all that. So, but just as far as the dispatch company goes, anything above that $31 is theirs.
Okay.
Mr. Cheney.
Do you know what surge pricing is? You said you drove for Uber?
As an Uber driver, I did it when they were first here, so they didn't do a whole bunch of surge pricing. And it seemed like every time I was somewhere, they were surge pricing somewhere else.
Surge pricing is a way they regulate what you pay based on the environment. Let's say there's a heavy snowfall, they surge price, they increase what you're paying.
Taxis
And you were
don't.
talking about taxis, Pete. I rode in a taxi in Tokyo in the Ginza district, electronics, and I can tell you what a taxi cab driver ride is like there doing 90 miles an hour down Tokyo. A lot of fun. But the reason
So
we
you
have
want to
cameras,
deregulate so we can
I
have
don't,
that
he
kind of
does.
fun here?
The reason we have cameras and GPS is to protect the public. That's what that does. That gives evidence of what happened in that taxi. And Uber Lyft doesn't have it, I'm sorry. But we want, when you trust a valuable commodity like a child or an adult in that car, you want to know you've got a background of what happens while they're driving.
Got another work session coming up. Any further comments before I adjourn? We're adjourned.